Follow the money. Oklahoma created incentives for horizontal drilling when the technology was new, expensive, and uncertain. Today, that technology has proved itself. Yet the tax preference stayed, expanded, and now applies to every new well. In fiscal year 2024, the Oklahoma Tax Commission estimated the cost at nearly $179 million. Government incentives are usually sold as temporary help. The state encourages a new technology or an investment that might not happen otherwise. Once the technology succeeds, the incentive should end. Oklahoma's New Well incentive shows what often happens instead. The technology succeeds, the industry grows, but the tax break develops a political constituency and becomes hard to remove. The original horizontal drilling incentive was not unreasonable. In the early 1990s, drilling horizontally through an oil or gas formation was more difficult, more expensive, and more uncertain than ordinary vertical drilling. Oklahoma wanted producers to experiment with the method and learn how to use it. At the start, this was a technology development policy. Horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing changed the oil and gas industry. Horizontal wells became more productive, and the technology moved from experiment to standard practice in many formations. The incentive succeeded, but instead of allowing the temporary preference to expire, Oklahoma preserved much of the tax advantage. In 2014, Oklahoma addressed the unfairness between horizontal and vertical wells by expanding the benefit. New horizontal and vertical wells received a reduced 2% rate for the first 36 months, followed by 7% afterward. Later, the state raised the new well rate to 5%. That was less generous than 1 or 2%, but it remained a tax preference. The timing matters. A horizontal well does not produce evenly over its life. Production is usually concentrated in the early months and years, followed by a steep decline. One Oklahoma production profile estimated that a typical horizontal oil well produced about 62% of its lifetime oil in the first 3 years. Oklahoma charges the lower rate during those 3 years, when the discount is worth the most. The Oklahoma Tax Commission calls this provision the New Well Incentive, reduced rate at 5%. For fiscal year 2024, it estimated the tax expenditure at $178,933,000. The state did not write a single check for that amount. The money was delivered through the tax code, but revenue not collected is still public money. The current law applies equally to new horizontal and vertical wells, but equal percentages do not produce equal dollars. Horizontal wells usually produce much larger volumes, especially in the first 3 years. Our working estimate is that horizontal production receives roughly 90 to 95% of the total benefit. That is not an official tax commission allocation. A comprehensive review should require the exact breakdown. For every $100 of taxable production, a 5% gross production tax leaves $95 before other expenses. A 7% tax leaves $93. The difference is $2. No producer will turn it down. But improving the return on a well is not the same as causing the well to be drilled. Companies drill primarily because of geology, reserves, expected production, prices, costs, and leases. The correct but-for question is not whether producers would prefer to pay 5% instead of 7%. Of course they would. The question is how many wells would not have been drilled but for that 2-point discount. A tax incentive should be measured by the investment it causes, not by the number of companies willing to collect it. Oklahoma applied a reasonable principle to wind power. Incentives created for a new technology should be reconsidered after the technology becomes commercially successful. Wind incentives were curtailed, and wind continued to grow. In 2024, wind supplied about 41% of Oklahoma's in-state electricity generation. Why has Oklahoma not applied the same principle to horizontal drilling? Oil and gas is enormously important to Oklahoma's history, economy, employment, and public revenue. But importance is not immunity from review. The choice is not supporting oil and gas or opposing it. The question is whether this particular incentive produces more value for Oklahoma families than it costs. Oklahoma already has an Incentive Evaluation Commission. That process is useful, but it is not the same as one comprehensive, simultaneous review of the entire shadow budget. The Newell incentive should be compared with other incentives and with direct investments in schools, healthcare, roads, childcare, public safety, and workforce development. Savings should return to the General Revenue Fund and be compared with Oklahoma's other pressing needs. An incentive should not become an inheritance. Oklahoma created its original horizontal drilling incentive for an understandable reason. The technology was new, the cost was high, and the outcome was uncertain. 3 decades later, none of those descriptions fits horizontal drilling. Every incentive should demonstrate that it remains necessary, changes economic behavior, and produces more public benefit than it costs. Prove it, reform it, or end it,